Hey, what's up, kids? Gonna give folks a couple seconds to get on. I apologize because I'm gonna be squinty looking at this screen. It is so bright outside, and my little delicate eyes are not ready for it this morning. So, I haven't been live in a couple days on here, and I just had some thoughts this morning that I wanted to share. So even if no one catches it right now, I hope folks will catch it on the replay. So I've been trying to just re-engage my mind and my consciousness every morning. I used to, when I was younger, I would go and I would do devotions, right? I'd read the Bible every morning, and I journal every morning and just sit and get my brain working. Basically, it was like a workout for my brain in the morning, getting it functioning. And so I was doing that today. And I've been trying to do that more regularly, especially since this realization that I can re-engage with my own sense of calling, even while being queer. There is a large spider right in front of me. It's kind of horrifying. Anyways, so even while being queer, I can still re-engage who I am and who my purpose is in the world. So this morning I was listening to a podcast, and it was a podcast on the topic of grief, which seems culturally relevant at the moment. Definitely seems like this is something that matters right now, you know what I mean? And it really got me thinking, right? So we know the rulings that came out in regards to Breonna Taylor yesterday, which is, it's so many things right now, as is much of 2020. It's all of the things all at once. But as much as I hate to say it, I'm not surprised that Breonna Taylor's the decision regarding the officers that murdered Breonna Taylor, I'm not surprised that it happened the way it happened. And the reason I'm not surprised that it happened the way that it happened is because it's because the system was designed to work this way. The system is doing what the system was designed to do. We can't expect a corrupt system to convict corrupt individuals. It's not going to happen that way, And so I'm angry, and I'm frustrated, and I'm saddened, and I am all of these things. But the reality is we knew the ruling was going to go down this way. My dog's trying to join us this morning. I don't know if you guys can see him over here. Oh no. Let's see here. You see the doggo in the window? That's Jordan. But the system, so the system is working the way it was designed to work, and it's disgusting and it's abhorrent, but it's not shocking. And so sometimes when I'm in a situation like this where just everything seems so shocking, or not even shocking, everything just seems so bad and awful, and I feel powerless. I always try to remind myself what is my power in this situation, and I haven't found the answer to that. You know what I mean? I'm gonna vote, but that doesn't seem like enough. But I was listening to a podcast this morning, and it really struck me about where the world is at, especially in the wake of this Breonna Taylor decision. And I'm gonna post, I recorded the clip of the comments, and I'm gonna post the clip in the comments here once this live video is over, so you can listen to it, so you get a little more context. But basically, the podcast that I was listening to is it's a writer that I like and that I follow, and he's interviewing another writer who writes and works around the idea of grief. And grief is something that I think is innate to life, and it's innate to spirituality, and it happens when someone dies, but it also happens when dreams die, and when hopes die, and when the way you thought things were going to go down, when it doesn't go down that way. Grief happens when friendship dies. Grief is something that's all around us, and if we don't process it, we've all seen people who have kind of lost it in the wake of grief. And so I think that our culture is grieving in some ways right now, and that's why things seem so wild, because there's not just one funeral happening right now, and this is the language that I'm borrowing from the podcast. So yes, Breonna Taylor was murdered. There's no if, ands, or buts, no way around that. It was literally murder, right? So people are grieving the loss of Breonna Taylor, but people are also grieving the loss that justice exists. People are grieving the loss of a sense that they would ever feel safe or protected by law enforcement. People are grieving the loss of family members who are completely blind to systemic racism. People are grieving the loss of feeling connected to their community because they've seen the racism and hatred rise up around the community around them. So like there's so many funerals going on right now in 2020, right? Around Breonna Taylor. And then if you expand it even further around COVID, around politics, people are grieving, and whether they realize it or not, people are grieving the fact that things are really fucked up right now. And people are grieving their sense of connection to their families around them. People are grieving close, important friendships that have fallen away because of underlying political or racist ideas are being exposed. Like there are all of these funerals happening right now, and all of them are happening in real time, and most people don't know they're happening, right? So we have to realize, like, as people, right? First of all, we got to realize as people, because it starts with us, but we got to realize that like all of these funerals are happening, and what am I grieving right now, and how am I acting out of my grief? Because grief can do like a lot of things, and all of them are valid, because feelings are valid, even if they don't necessarily make sense. Feelings are valid because they exist. So like in 2020 today, what am I grieving and how am I reacting out of it? Because like if I'm grieving the loss of a connection to a group of people that I thought was a friend and we have differing ideas, like if I'm grieving that, I'm gonna be reacting out of that grief, and I need to be aware that like that's happening, you know what I mean? And in our culture, like a lot of times we run away from grief and we run right to anger. But the problem is that anger is like almost always a secondary emotion. There's almost always something underlying grief or underlying anger, and a lot of times it's grief. And so I guess like my thought for the day is there's no answers in this situation. There's no answers in 2020 right now. But my thought is just like, are you willing to like let yourself grieve, and what are you grieving, right? I'm definitely personally grieving the idea that there is a justice system, right? Because there's not a justice system for everybody. There's a justice system for some people. I'm grieving the loss of the idea that people are just decent, good human beings that would care to see injustice. I am grieving like all of these separate things, and the thing is like I'm one person, and there are all of these billions of people on the planet who are all simultaneously experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing from a very different perspective. And so not shockingly, this live is like not getting a ton of views because you really just don't like throw out the idea of grief and have a lot of people engage. But I think it's very important to know that the world that we see right now, we are seeing the after effects of grief. We're seeing the side effects of grief. We're seeing the effects of dreams that have died, of hopes that have died, of safety that has died, of public engagement that has died, we're grieving the loss of the idea that, you know, we're functioning in a society that wants to move towards a greater whole. We're grieving the loss of connection, and all sorts of wild things happen when we're grieving, and our whole culture, our whole world even is grieving right now. And what does that mean like for us, and how do we go forward in that, and how do we find a way to not run away from our own grief but to embrace it, and what is it a sign of, and what do we need to do in the light of that? There's just a lot of things that are happening right now, and a lot of them are causing us to grieve, and for very legitimate reasons, you know what I mean? I can't even imagine the grief that's happening for Breonna Taylor's family. I can't even imagine the grief that's happening in the African community at large. Like, I can't imagine the grief that is happening in the city of Louisville. Like, these are all things that are happening right now. And things have happened that are wrong and that are bad. And I'm grieving the fact, and I think we're culturally grieving the fact that the system is reacting how we thought it would. So what does that mean? What do we do going forward? How do we process that? How do we like move forward and embrace that grief and grow from it instead of just being immobilized by it? I don't know. Like, there's no answers in this podcast, and it's, or in this podcast. There's no answers in this live, and it's not necessarily a fun one, but here we are. And there's these multiple funerals going on for all of these different things. And how do we react in that realm? And I think we have to be really sensitive to the fact that we have to realize that other people are going through these multiple funerals at the same time. And we gotta, I think part of it, how we gotta react is just to realize that everybody's grieving in one way or another. And you can't put a timeline on grief, and you can't put requirements on it, but it exists, and we've got to have that interpersonal sensitivity there. So I don't know, these are just a couple of my thoughts, but I'm gonna post the podcast that I was listening to. It's a little bit older, so they're talking about the Pulse shooting in Orlando, and the grief that caused. But I'm gonna post it there just so you can hear the original context and the original thoughts, because it was really, really thought-provoking. So thanks you guys so much for listening. We will have another Official Conversations interactive video this Sunday. I'm working to nail down a time, but I'm going to be talking to a friend of mine who grew up non-religious and then went through the Christian evangelical church, and now is Muslim. And I'm going to be talking to her because I feel like, you know, Islam is a beautiful, poetic religion that we so often don't understand, and I'm really excited to hear their perspective and that journey through all of those. So yeah, that'll be on Sunday. I'll drop a flyer for it, but thank you guys so much for listening. Have a good day, everybody.